What's up, traders? Eric here from MajorLeagueTrading.com. And we finally did it. S&P's traded 5,000 today. Kind of a crazy number there. And it really didn't seem to care. Like, we just ended up, we traded all the way up into 5,020 here. So it wasn't any type of resistance, any form of, pullback, or really anything that happened once we, kind of broke through it. And we broke through it, like, with a kind of a vengeance, right? I mean, just looking at, like, a 2-minute chart here, we ended up with almost a 7-point bar that just literally shot right up through 5,000. And then what's really even more interesting from that point is, like, we never retested 5,000 later into the day here. So, when you look at this, if 5,000 is a number in which we should be paying attention to, it never retested, it never traded again on the day. So I think that's really interesting here. The key thing now being is, like, okay, S&Ps have traded 5,000, but the SPY hasn't quite traded 500. So are we going to get the additional, kind of 20 points out of the S&Ps and the next, 2 points to the upside here out of the SPY and run up and go ahead and tag that 500 here into the end of the week? And it would make sense, right? But it would also have made sense that once we broke through 5,000 today, that we probably should have tested it and then, made the move higher, right? So at the moment, again, this market still continues to just truck higher no matter what. It doesn't really seem to make a difference here, unless you're the Russell, right? So Russell here not wanting to really participate today. It tried to kind of buck the system here today. It got a pretty decent sell-off first thing this morning of about 20 points there. Like, rather quickly even, I might add. Like, these are just straight 2-minute red bars to the downside. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16 minutes of just straight selling to the downside there this morning in the Russell. So overall, really kind of interesting day with respect to the Russell. Again, not wanting to participate, not wanting to do the things in which we thought it should do, really, I guess. And we really didn't respect this 62.80 level at all, right? The first 2 minutes of the day just sliced right through it. And that level was, kind of pivotal, I guess, in some way for what my plan was on the day. So we can take a look at that here. This was the morning write-up from today. In the pre-market, S&Ps were pushing, up close to that 5,000. But again, with the level in which we were watching was 49.74 quarters. If we would have gotten the pullback, we were trading like 94s, 95s around the time that I ended up sending this out. But a pullback from here, 20-point pullback, it's likely going to look a little bit too weak in order to long that, right? I didn't think we'd quite get that full pullback. And same thing here with NASDAQ. NASDAQ up over 766s. With the trend, would be taking out the red bar from yesterday, would be wide open territory. And then this is where I wrote what the actual plan was for the day and ultimately what I ended up taking here. So I said an initial morning fake out higher that can pull back, establish some sort of divergence, and then get a trend going long is the only way in which I can see playing for that, or a long in general, meaning playing for that 5,000 S&P print or playing for the wide open territory and NASDAQ running up into 18K. Now, I also said if we can test 1962.80s, use that as our support level on the indices for that pullback, because it's the only thing in which we really had that was close. We were set to open somewhere up in here around 1968s. So it would have made sense, like, hey, let's go ahead and pull back, test that, and then we can move. But then again, I said a rip straight from the open is worst case scenario, because then we really don't have any entries for longs there. So with that being said, the trade in which I took from today, so to break this down just a little bit further here, ultimately ends up being another divergence trade, very, very similar in nature to almost all other divergence trades, in the sense that I ended up taking this in the Dow here. My entry was right at 38,688. And then I ended up getting out on this divergence right up here and it was good for right at like 100 points. So with this, you can see we come down. We're ultimately making new lows here at 955s. We get the green arrow coming out of the S&Ps. We get the green arrow coming out of the NASDAQ. And we've got all of the things, right? Now, we have all of the things except for we don't have the Russell holding 1962 80s, right? That could potentially be a problem at some point, maybe, right? It might not. Overall, markets might not want to get the full boat rally in which we were kind of looking for, right? Which would be, NASDAQ up into 18K. And it could kind of stifle the rally a bit today, right? If Russell wants to play weak and maybe actually go lower on the day, then it might be difficult for the rest of the markets to rally, right? Or the Russell is just telling us a story for tomorrow where Russell was weak today, NASDAQ, S&Ps were strong, and then the Russell ends up, flip-flopping tomorrow, which has been a very, common theme here lately. So, with that being said, we did have, a little bit of a negative here to this trade just because of the Russell. And then the other piece to this is that we didn't have the NASDAQ back up over that 766 quarters, right? If you remember in the write-up here, we kind of talked about NASDAQ up over 766s with a trend would be taking out the red bar from yesterday, be wide open territory, right? So we really wanted NASDAQ up through that 766s. But again, we're valid in the trade in which we took because of the fact that we have the divergence, right? At the end of the day, any trade, whether it's at a level, not at a level, against trend, with trend, from bigger picture standpoint, right? Any of those things don't necessarily matter because the divergence is a strategy which can stand on its own. We don't necessarily have to have these other things in place. When we do get them, I think it makes it that much better. But at the end of the day, we don't necessarily have to have those in place, right? So with that being said, the trade in which I took ultimately was from here, from 688 up into these highs here. Now again, I gave it this pullback, right? And ultimately, I could have let it come all the way back had I wanted to. On a pullback down into the opening print, which as you can see for the Dow, would have come down, tested this, and then ultimately, managed to make new highs on the day, right? But again, the premise and the concept behind a divergence is ultimately to identify potential highs and lows on the day. So when we ended up getting this divergence right here, which again, you can see Russell doesn't make new highs, Dow makes new highs, NASDAQ makes new highs, gets a red arrow, and then the S&Ps don't get a new high, right? So this high over here was 15 and a quarter. This high over here was 14 and a quarter. It's going to take a little bit of time getting used to saying 5,015, 5,014. But yeah, so we had a clear divergence. We had signals in place. And ultimately, it ends up being a good exit, right? Just from a risk to reward standpoint, we can see that I would have had to have given this, basically 50 some odd points back down here below opening print. I think opening print was 334s. This low right here ends up being 734s. This low ends up being 732s. So I would have had to give it a pretty decent amount of worth of room. And then it really only just pops up here and gets, new highs, right? So the risk reward there from that standpoint, I didn't think was there. And I even typed it in the chat that I thought whatever pullback we may get, that it would be kind of sharp and spiky and rather difficult to ultimately hold. And we did have some bond auction stuff coming out at later on, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So at the end of the day, I mean, we were, an hour and a half into the day at 10:50 here. And we waited around for about 30, 35 minutes to be able to take this position in the first place, right? Once the Russell just completely failed 6280s off the get-go, it's okay. I guess we'll wait and see when and if this divergence ultimately wants to set up, when and if NASDAQ wants to get up through 766 quarters, and all of these things, right? And hopefully that's kind of starting to paint a little bit of a picture in your guys' minds from the standpoint of, like, a lot of this is just waiting around, ultimately looking for a trade, right? I mean, we weren't in this trade for any lengthy amount of time, right? I mean, 40-ish minutes, 45-ish minutes. But we were waiting for a while in order for that trade to set up in the first place, right? So again, this one is a little bit different here in the sense that the reason in which I took the trade was ultimately the divergence from back over here at 955, but I didn't take what would be considered my first entry on this because I wanted to see just something else. I wanted to see some sort of retest. I wanted to see some sort of change of trend. Anything that would kind of give me a little bit of validation to this maybe getting the move. Because again, remember, Russell didn't hold that 6280. NASDAQ's technically under 766s, but we did open above the level, which is a good thing, right? So, and then at the same time, like, we've got room to pull back here into 74 quarters, which is about another 15 points, give or take, out of the S&Ps. So it's like we have all of these things. So I want to see just a little bit extra. And sometimes asking for or waiting for, if you will, however you want to phrase that little bit extra will cause you to miss trades. In this case, it didn't, right? We were able to ultimately do that. And the only thing in which I saw here was just that we came down. We were able to set higher lows here on the smaller time frame NASDAQ 2-minute charts, which I was watching. And then we came down here and we got equal lows out of the Dow. So we came down, we traded 659s. This low over here was 659s. And the Dow was the only one in which kind of retested those lows. Now again, that would have been totally fine had the Dow broken that low. Let's say we traded 657s, 656s. Doesn't make a difference, right? Because that would have given us just another divergence, right? And chances are, had that happened, we would have had another green arrow come into play right here, which would have been even better, right? I mean, if we can get another divergence, okay, cool. Like, everything else is holding, and now it's time for the Dow to turn on turn on the jets and make the moves to the upside, right? So yeah, in a nutshell, broken down, that is the trade from today. I did grab a super small micro contract. I talked about this on my Instagram story as well. In the NASDAQ here from I think my fill was 736.50s. Right, basically through there. The low of that move ended up being 726 quarter. Low of this bar here, 725 quarters, so 736.50s. Being my fill there, I had roughly 10, 12 points worth of risk on that position. Now, to speak to the risk piece, and then I'll cover Meta here as well, which was another trade in which I took today, and these would be the only trades in which I took today. My risk here in this position, again, I picked this up 38,688. Again, that low down there at 38,659s. Okay, cool. If I put my stop at 38,658, I have about a 30-point risk in this trade. Now, again, I could give it a tick or two. There might be some slippage in there or whatever. But again, I was just doing quick math and going, okay, cool, I can jump in here. We're reacting from the double bottom, if you will. And it gives me about a 30-point risk. And what I was really targeting in this from the standpoint of the Dow is that we just had these highs from all the way up here at like 38,892s. So call this 38,888. I'm looking at like 200 points that the Dow could move, and I got like a 30-point stop, right? Even if I had a 50-point stop and it's willing to move 200 points for me, like I'm still open for that trade. But again, we were able to get in this with about a 30-point stop here, and it ended up being good for just shy of 100 points on the exit right up here. So would I take this trade again? Yes. Did it work out? Yes. Would I have been just as happy or fine had it ultimately ended up stopping out? Yes. Again, I accepted the risk. we did all the things, we checked all the boxes, and we just managed it accordingly, right? So that was the future side of things for the day. And I also ended up taking a meta position here on the day. So we had a level in place at 465.75s. I've been waiting for this level to break here for a couple of days now. And I think once we break through this level, then we've got room, basically all the way up here towards 481.79s. And then maybe a little bit more, through that. Maybe we'll get up towards those, the highs are 485.96s, right? But this would be the next target to the upside. So with this morning, I ultimately ended up picking up a position in here when we broke back up through 465.75. So I let it get that first test this morning as we started to pull back and then break back up through the 465.75 level. I went ahead and picked up a position in this. And the great thing about this trade, which we were kind of talking about this in yesterday's video, where it's like, hey, we might get a +1, we might get a +2, we might get a +3. And then all of a sudden there's going to be an opportunity that a +10 trade comes about. And that was this one for today, right? So I'm still holding this position. Again, I'm going to get a little bit of theta decay overnight on that. I understand that. So I may have to manage it a little bit differently from my initial stop loss. But my initial stop loss on this was about 60 cents per contract. And back of the envelope math up into 481.79 on the contracts in which I have should give me about a $6 reward on those contracts, right? So I picked those up. I have the 475s, and I picked those up for $2.05. So at 481.79s here, they should be worth like maybe $8.50, give or take. And I'm in them for $2.05. So I have about $6.50 worth of potential gain out of these trades. And I looked at a 60-cent stop loss here on these contracts. So I'm permitted to take this trade, and I'm going to take this trade, right? It was also outperforming the market this morning. It had good relative strength here 15 minutes into the day. And that's when I put the position on, right? Now, again, I've been waiting for this level for a couple of days. We ultimately ended up getting it. I found my entry. And then I've been holding this thing since 9:44 this morning, basically, right? So I could have trimmed up here. I think it was good for about 2 hours, maybe 2.5 hours up here. I think it traded 350s on the high of the day, right? So it was 60-cent stop. But again, it has that 10R potential. So I want to try and hold as much of this position as possible to try and get that 10 Rs. If I end up losing 1 R, then I'm totally okay with it. And especially at the same time, considering that I was able to also now on the day, I didn't know this at the time, right? Because I hadn't taken the position yet, but I have some cushion from the Dow trade on the day now as well, right? So even though I'm carrying this one over into tomorrow, I've built a little bit of cushion from today on that, so it makes it a little bit easier to hold this position as well, right? So, anyways, that's the meta trade. We'll see. Hopefully it doesn't pull a Tesla on us and reverse the very, next day, which I did think Tesla was going to be a really, really great trade here for the week. Turns out maybe not. So, anyways, that's what I'm looking at for the moment. Tomorrow could be rather quiet here, depending on if the market wants to move or not, right? And that sounds kind of like arbitrary here. But we made the nice move today. S&Ps, I think we're up like 40 points on the day. So that's a pretty decent move. Can we just chill out for maybe a day or two before we decide to make the run on Friday? I don't think that's too much to ask. So anyways, I'm going to be playing it super, super patient again tomorrow. That has been the theme of the week. So far, it has worked every single day this week. And looking to just continue to protect those profits that we've already booked and add on really solid A+ trades, like the Meta, for example. So If you have not checked out my Instagram story from today or my Instagram reel, I would go ahead and check those out as well. A little bit more context around the Dow trade, just in terms of sizing and kind of it being a fun little project for me. And then, yeah, that's what I got. We're about to kick off the mentorship applications. Those acceptance emails will go out tomorrow. And yeah, it's good timing. S&Ps, NASDAQ, Dow didn't quite get there. New all-time highs, so get your party hats on. And we'll see what tomorrow brings for us. So, as always, take care, hope it helps, and I will see you guys on the next video. Peace.